Right. So today, like we had mentioned yesterday, we will be discussing the questions from biochemistry in the AIMS in June 2020 session. And these are basically recall questions. So obviously there will be some discrepancies and some confusions in the options. So we have taken a lot of feedback from a lot of you and tried to come up with the most true options, and that is what we are going to discuss. Wherever there is still persisting doubt, I'll highlight what are the possible options which might have been there and what would be the most correct answer in that scenario. Depending on the options, that our answers change. So we have to make sure that we are discussing all the possible options and we are prepared for all the eventualities. If there is change in the options, then how we are going to mark these sessions. All right. So let us wait for a few more minutes, maybe 4 5 minutes, and then we can start. In the meantime, you can give me a feedback, those who have joined us, whether you are able to hear me and whether the picture part is clear, whether you're able to see the video, whether the screen is visible or not. Just give the feedback so that we can start. Okay, a lot of problem from the YouTube side today. A lot of our videos have been shifted to some other platforms because of difficulty in creating the stream, but somehow we have been able to successfully start this stream. It's just a matter of chance. Let's hope it stays this way and we are able to complete our session like this. Okay. Audible or not? Please give me the feedback. Audible or not? Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me? Is it audible or not? Is it audible or not? So that I can start. I think we should start now. And let's start with the first session. I've tried to arrange the topics system wise so that there is no hodgepodge in the questions. Although obviously in the paper the questions were not asked in the any pattern, they were random questions. So let's start without much ado. The first question. Okay, question number one, enzymes present in both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. Now, this is a very commonly asked topic. You know that a lot of reactions in glycolysis and gluconeogenesis are reversible and therefore they are common. Reversible and therefore they are common. So, let's take a look at the enzymes which are exclusive for glycolysis and the enzymes which are exclusive for gluconeogenesis, means they undo the action of the respective enzymes. Remaining enzymes will be the same. Let's see. So as you can see here, in glycolysis we have the enzyme catalyzing the last irreversible reaction, that is the pyruvate kinase. Then we have the PFK1, the phosphofructokinase 1, and then we have the hexokinase or the glucokinase. These enzymes catalyze the irreversible reaction, meaning the backward reaction cannot be catalyzed by the same enzyme. You will need other enzymes to catalyze the backward reaction. The reaction of pyruvate kinase is bypassed by the pyruvate carboxylase, which converts the pyruvate to oxaloacetate. It converts pyruvate into oxaloacetate, and the phosphoryl pyruvate carboxykinase, which will convert the oxaloacetate back to the phosphoenol pyruvate, right? So these two enzymes will bypass the reaction catalyzed by the pyruvate kinase. The reaction catalyzed by the PFK1 is bypassed by the fructose 1,6 bisphosphatase, and hexokinase oblique glucokinase reactions bypassed by the glucose 6 phosphatase. Except for these specific enzymes, all other enzymes for glycolysis and gluconeogenesis are common. Depending on the hormonal impetus, depending on the metabolic requirements, the specific direction of the reaction will be decided, but the reaction will be catalyzed by the same enzyme. So with this understanding, let's go back to the question and try to answer. So the phosphofructokinase specific for glycolysis, PEP-CK specific for gluconeogenesis, the pyruvate kinase specific for glycolysis. So the correct answer is the phosphoglycerate kinase, which is converting the 1,3-BPG into the 3-phosphoglycerate, whereby the ATP is synthesized in glycolysis, and during gluconeogenesis the backward reaction will occur. This is a reversible reaction, please note, this is a reversible reaction. So during gluconeogenesis the backward reaction will be catalyzed. During glycolysis the 1,3-BPG is converted to the 3-phosphoglycerate kinase. Please note, this reaction is readily bypassed by arsenite. This reaction is bypassed by arsenite pathologically, and physiologically in the RBC this reaction is bypassed by forming an intermediate 2,3-BPG. In both these processes the ATP is not formed. In the RBC, when we form the 2,3-BPG, we call it the Rappaport-Lou-Behring shunt. Please remember this name, the Rappaport-Lou-Behring shunt. Write it here. The Rappaport-Lou-Behring shunt, which will bypass the formation of the ATP during conversion from 1,3-PG to 3-PG. This is specific for RBC. This is occurring only in the RBC. Okay, so these are some highlights for the phosphoglycerate kinase. This reaction is the only kinase in glycolysis which is catalyzing the reversible reaction, and it can be bypassed by arsenite, and it is also bypassed by the Rappaport-Lou-Behring shunt. Okay, let's go to the next question. Now in this particular question had a lot of controversy regarding the options, which option is given, which option is not given. Let me first go through the options and then I'll tell you what is the confusion among the options and what should be the correct answer. All right, so first the glycogen is compact. Now some students said it was written more compact than starch, some students said more compact than glucose, but I have written, most of the students said that it was just compact. Okay, second, where we had maximum controversy is this option. Maximum controversy can be reduced from multiple branches or ends, and other students said that the option is has multiple reducing ends. Now see, these are two different statements. Whether the end is reducing or we can reduce the glycogen from multiple ends, these are two different options. If the option says has multiple reducing ends, please note this is not correct. If the option says it has multiple reducing ends, is not correct, because in glycogen, in starch, we have a single reducing end, that is the first monosaccharide, only that is reducing, all other ends are non-reducing, so that story is over. If the option says has multiple reducing end, no, that is not correct. Can be stored at multiple sites? We would say only very limited sites are there. For example, liver, the muscle, and maybe to some extent in the CNS. These are some of the options where we can store. So limited site for storage is there. We can't say multiple sites. Okay, then can provide glucose as much as needed when needed for 1 week. This is also not correct. Typically 12 to 24 hours in case of the liver glycogen. All right, so we see that most of the options do not appear to be very correct. If you go about whether it is compact or not, again the answer would be no, it is not compact. Even if you compare it with starch, it is not necessarily more compact, because the linear form of starch, which is the amylose, it is forming the solenoid organization, which is a very compact structure. It is the most compact organization for a linear structure. So I would say the compact part is also not correct. So the most likely correct answer should be can be reduced from multiple branches or the ends. What this means is, when we have large number of branching, each of the branches can be used each of the branches can be used for cleavage, for the action of the enzyme alpha 1 glucosidase, which can cleave, sorry, 1,4 glucosidase, which can cleave the glucose residues from the end. However, if this option were to be has multiple reducing end, then this will become wrong, and in that case, the preferred answer can be either can be stored multiple sites. Obviously, three sites are there from at where we can store. It is not only liver; it can be stored in the muscle and the CNS also. If option C is also not there, then we can go for compact. Please note that we are not the preferred answers. The preferred answer is can be reduced from multiple branches or ends. If that option is not there, then we prefer to go for can be stored at multiple sites. We have the liver, the muscle, and the CNS. Even that option is not there, then a matter of best possible answer, in that case we can go for compact. So in the given options, the best answer should be can be reduced from multiple branches and ends, and the second best answer I would go B, better than C, better than A. This would be the order of preference for me in the options that I have given. All right, I hope that makes sense to everyone. Okay, now this is a very difficult question from the glycosaminoglycans, which was asked, talking about the structure. Now we don't expect the students to remember the structure, but if you know some details from the glycosaminoglycan, which are very briefly mentioned in your textbook, whether it is Harper or some other book, then possibly we could have solved this question. Although I would say this is one of those questions which you are not expected to solve. All right, so I'll give some highlights which can help you to narrow down the options. All right, so we know some peculiarities about the different glycosaminoglycans which can help us to narrow down the options. Let's talk about the keratin sulfate first. See, identify the image and we have multiple options with us. So first option is keratin sulfate. Now about keratin sulfate, whether it is the type 1 or the type 2, the most important thing which you must remember is the keratin sulfate does not contain uronic acid. All right, normally we say the glycosaminoglycan is a uronic acid plus amino sugar, and this is repeating n number of times. So basically what we say is a glycosaminoglycan is a repeating disaccharide where we have the uronic acid and we have the amino sugar. I'll quickly talk about the uronic acid and the amino sugar and then come back to this structure. So when we say the uronic acid, what you have to remember, uronic acid will have carboxyl group at carbon 6. So if you find the carboxyl group at carbon 6, that is the uronic acid. All right, carboxyl group at carbon 6 in the monosaccharide, that is uronic acid. Now look at this structure. We have the carboxylic group at position 6, right? What this means, this is the uronic acid, whether it is the glucuronic acid or idiuronic acid, no need to go into the details, but this is a uronic acid, so it cannot be keratin sulfate, because we said the keratin sulfate does not have uronic acid. So whenever you get an image where the glucuronic acid or idiuronic acid is present, immediately we know that it cannot be the keratin sulfate. Okay, next we go to the dermatan sulfate. Now dermatan sulfate has a very important peculiarity, that linkage here is alpha 1,3 linkage. If you have attended the classes on isomerism, then you will know that in the ring structure, when we have the ring structure, whether it is the hexose or pentose, the pyranose form or the furanose form, doesn't matter, this is carbon 1, and this is carbon 6. Carbon 6 is above the plane of the ring. Carbon 6 is above the plane of the ring, which is made by a thick line. In that case, there are two possible orientation for the hydroxyl group at carbon 1. If the hydroxyl group is also above the ring, we call it the beta orientation. If the carboxyl group is below the plane of the ring, we call it the alpha orientation. Alright, this is anomalism. This is anomalism, that is stereoisomerism seen at carbon 1. In the ring structure, we have two forms, the alpha and the beta anomeric forms. Alright, so if the bond is facing upwards on the same side as the carbon, this will be the beta form. But if the carbon and the hydroxyl group are on opposite sides of the ring, then it will be the alpha carbon. Beta and alpha. Go back to the structure and look at the bond. This is the carbon 1. This is the carbon 1, and you can see the bond is upwards, same direction as carbon 6. It is upwards, same direction as carbon 6. This means it is a beta linkage. Carbon 1 beta linkage is being used here, and we clearly said the dermatan sulfate will have the alpha linkage. So when you have the beta linkage, the dermatan sulfate is out. Dermatan sulfate must have the alpha linkage, not the beta linkage. It will have the alpha linkage and not the beta linkage. Coming to heparin, heparin has a characteristic point that it is rarely sulfated. Now look at the structure, sulfate here, another sulfate here, lots of sulfate are there. What this means, it is unlikely that we are dealing with heparin. Heparin is rarely acetylated, acetylated as well as sulfated. I'm so sorry, I mentioned the sulfation, that is acetylation. This is the acetylation which is shown here. So rarely heparin is acetylated. If you find the acetylation, then it is unlikely that we are dealing with heparin. Alright, so three options already eliminated, so you're left with, by default the answer should be chondroitin sulfate. So additional points in favor of chondroitin sulfate: it contains acetylated sugar, which is shown here. It can be highly sulfated. One of the characteristic properties of chondroitin, it is highly sulfated. Various sulfate groups can be there, and it has beta 1,3 linkage, and it contains the uronic acid. So all these features are in favor of the molecule being the chondroitin sulfate. So very likely the molecule is the chondroitin sulfate. Obviously, if a different image is there, we have to evaluate it based on some of these peculiarities which are there, which will help us to narrow down. You don't need to know the details of each of these structure, but some highlights, if you know, it will help you to eliminate or select some of the options. All right, again I would say this is a not expected question. You're not expected to know the images, you're not expected to know the images for the glycosaminoglycans. Okay, coming to the next question. This was a somewhat simpler question. Which of the following is not an enzyme in cholesterol biosynthesis? Now this should be simple for everyone. See, I'll briefly draw the reactions which are being used here. The acetyl coenzyme A, two acetyl coenzyme A will combine to form the acetoacetyl coenzyme A. They will combine to form the acetoacetyl coenzyme A. All right, and this reaction is catalyzed by thiolase. This reaction is catalyzed by thiolase. All right, the acetoacetyl coenzyme A will then combine. It will then combine with another acetyl coenzyme A. It will combine with another acetyl coenzyme A, and then it will form the HMG CoA, alright, hydroxymethyl glutaryl coenzyme A, and obviously the enzyme in this case will be the HMG CoA synthetase. The HMG CoA synthetase, which is then acted upon by the reductase. The HMG CoA reductase, right, whereby we get the mevalonate. Here we get the product, the mevalonate. A similar series of reaction will occur inside the mitochondria. This is occurring in the cytoplasm where the cholesterol is being formed, but a similar series of reaction will occur in the mitochondria, and there the HMG CoA, alright, HMG CoA is acted upon by the HMG CoA lyase. It is acted upon by the HMG CoA lyase, where we get the acetoacetate, which is the first ketone body. Acetoacetate is formed. So HMG CoA lyase is an enzyme of ketone body synthesis. It is an enzyme of ketone body synthesis, not of cholesterol biosynthesis. Please note this, HMG CoA lyase will be the enzyme of ketone body synthesis, not of cholesterol biosynthesis. Alright. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Question number 5. Now question number 5, ammonia is detoxified in brain by leading to formation of, as you can see, there was some doubt about the option. Some students said the option 1 was glutamate, others said glutamine. Both are okay, doesn't matter, we'll see any of the two can be possible answers. The other options included the urea, alanine and arginine. Now all of you know this reaction where the alpha ketoglutarate can combine with ammonia and form the glutamate, or normally the backward reaction which occurs for the oxidative deamination. So this reaction being catalyzed by the glutamate dehydrogenase, whenever there is ammonia toxicity, it can be neutralized by the action of glutamate dehydrogenase to form the glutamate. So glutamate is a possible answer. In addition, we know that when you already have the glutamate, it can take up the glutamate can take up the free ammonia with the help of the ATP and get converted into the glutamine, right? The enzyme here being the glutamine synthetase. Glutamine synthetase is the enzyme. So depending on what is there in the option, either glutamate or glutamine, both are the correct answer. Ammonia is detoxified in brain by leading to formation of glutamate or glutamine. Alright, if you have to choose one of the two, if both are given, one option is glutamate and let's say option B is glutamine, then the preferred answer in that case will still be glutamate. Glutamate will be the preferred answer. Why? When there is excess ammonia, means we are talking about the detoxification. When there is excess ammonia, it will be detoxified by combining with the alpha ketoglutarate. Alright, so remember the answer in this question can either be glutamate or glutamine. If both of the options are there, the preferred answer will become the glutamate, because we're talking about the detoxification, means when there is excess ammonia. When there is excess ammonia, then the alpha ketoglutarate will combine with ammonia to form the glutamate. Alright, so both the options can be correct. Okay, now there was one question on the structure of the hemoglobin. So here I have shown the detailed structure which is there for hemoglobin. Some students said, okay, yes sir, something like this was there in the exam, although the other details were not there, which you can see in this diagram. They were not there in the exam. Alright, so this basically shows us how the different polypeptide of the hemoglobin are formed during the intrauterine and the adult life of the individual, and what are the different forms of hemoglobin which are there. You can see four peptide bonds. Peptides are labeled A, B, C, and D, and you have to choose which of them is the gamma chain. All right. So I'll try to simplify by giving you the list of the different hemoglobin in the different stages of life. So in the embryo, we have the four different types of hemoglobin. In the embryo means up to 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks or less than 3 months. All right. So we have the hemoglobin Gower. You can see the theta and the epsilon, zeta and the epsilon 2 are there. The zeta and the epsilon 2 are there. The Gower 2, the alpha and epsilon are there. The hemoglobin Portland, where we can see the zeta 2 and the gamma 2 are there, the zeta 2 and gamma 2. And hemoglobin Portland 2, where the zeta 2 and the beta 2 are there. They will persist for the first 3 months, that is the 12 weeks. You can see this is the one which is shown here. And in this time, the hemoglobin is being formed by the yolk sac. In the embryonal stage, the hemoglobin is being formed by the yolk sac. Gradually, when the liver starts forming, the liver will take up the formation of the hemoglobin. Initially, the liver will take up the formation of hemoglobin. So in the fetus, the hemoglobin F, which is fetal hemoglobin, is formed, which is called alpha 2 and gamma 2. You can see initially formed by the liver and later by the spleen. For some duration it is formed by the spleen. So A is alpha, A is alpha and B is beta. Initially you can see very less amount of beta is there, and this C is the gamma. Why? We just said we have the alpha 2 gamma 2, alpha 2 gamma 2. So this is the gamma which is formed in the fetus. So we get the fetal hemoglobin, the alpha 2 and gamma 2. Majority of the time we get the alpha 2 and gamma 2. As the time of birth comes, then the production shifts from the spleen to the bone marrow. The production shifts from spleen to the bone marrow, and ultimately we get the A2B2, which is the main form. In addition, we can also have the alpha 2 delta 2 and little amount of alpha 2 and gamma 2, very little amount of the alpha 2 and the gamma 2. All right. So these are the different types of hemoglobin, and based on the diagram you can see this D will stand for the delta form. D will stand for the delta form. So you can have the alpha 2 beta 2, you can have a little bit of alpha 2 and gamma 2 and alpha 2 and delta 2. These are the three forms which can be there. Okay, so that was about the hemoglobin. Let's go on to the next question, and which of the following will be incorrect in RH incompatibility. All right, RH incompatibility, what does it mean? RH incompatibility means there is hemolysis. When there is RH incompatibility, there is hemolysis. All right, and when there is hemolysis, we'll get the form of jaundice, which is the pre-hepatic jaundice. We get the pre-hepatic jaundice. Now, before you comment on the various options which is correct or incorrect, we'll quickly take a look at the table which shows the values of the two parameters in two places, that is the bilirubin and the urobilinogen. Urobilinogen. We'll take a look at the levels of bilirubin and urobilinogen. Bilirubin in serum and bilirubin in urine. Similarly, urobilinogen in urine and in the stool. So basically we are measuring four parameters, two parameters in two compartments, that makes the four parameters which we are analyzing: the bilirubin in serum and urine, and the urobilinogen in the urine and in the stool. So I'll show you the table which you can quickly note down, the table which shows the values of the various parameters in the three different conditions: the prehepatic, hepatic, and the post-hepatic jaundice. The prehepatic, hepatic, and the post-hepatic jaundice. Let's take a look. So this table clearly shows the value of serum bilirubin, the urinary bilirubin, the urine urobilinogen, and the fecal urobilinogen in the normal individuals, the hemolytic anemia, that is prehepatic hepatitis, and the obstructive jaundice, that is the post-hepatic jaundice. All right. So these are the three conditions in which we measure the parameters, and it helps us to distinguish the three conditions. All right. Let's see. In hemolytic anemia, the indirect bilirubin, also known as the unconjugated, it is the unconjugated bilirubin. It is the unconjugated bilirubin, and it is water insoluble. Please note, it is water insoluble. That is why it cannot appear in the urine. It is water insoluble, so it will not be soluble in the blood and plasma. It will not get filtered. It will not get filtered. That is why urinary bilirubin is absent. Because lot of bilirubin is being formed due to hemolysis, this will be secreted into the intestine, and in the intestine it will be converted to the urobilinogen. So the amount of urobilinogen is increased in the urine as well as in the stool. Coming to hepatitis, if there is inflammation, there can be something what is known as micro obstruction. If there is micro obstruction, the conjugated bilirubin will not get secreted. So number one, when there is hepatitis, there is less conjugation. Number two, if there is inflammation, then whatever bilirubin is getting conjugated, that also may not get secreted, resulting in both direct and indirect bilirubin getting elevated. Indirect, why? Because conjugation is not occurring properly, and direct because whatever is getting conjugated cannot be secreted, it is getting refluxed. It is getting refluxed back to the blood. Urinary bilirubin will be present if microobstruction is there. See, if microobstruction is there, only then the direct bilirubin will be found. Direct bilirubin is water is soluble. So if it is there, it will get excreted in the urine. Similarly, the bilirubin in intestine will be decreased if there is obstruction. If microobstruction is there, less of bilirubin will come in the intestine, and therefore less of it will be present in the urine and in the stool. Coming to obstructive jaundice, the direct, the water soluble or the conjugated form is elevated. Because it is water soluble, it will appear in the urine. Obstruction means the bilirubin will not go into the intestine, and therefore urobilinogen is not formed. So the urobilinogen in both the urine and the stool will be absent. All right. Here you should also know the enzymes which can be elevated for each of these. In obstructive jaundice, we will have the alkaline phosphatase. Alkaline phosphatase can be there. The gamma glutamyl transferase can be there, and the 5' nucleotidase. The 5' nucleotidase can be missing. The 5' nucleotidase can be missing. Sorry, elevated. In case of hepatic, ALT and AST will be elevated. And in case of hemolytic, the LDH will be elevated, particularly LDH type 2. Particularly the LDH type 2 will be elevated. So enzymes which are elevated, you should also know that the enzymes which are elevated, that also should be known to you. Okay, coming back to the question, let's see now. When we say RH incompatibility, it means the hemolysis, that is, we are talking about the pre-hepatic jaundice. In pre-hepatic jaundice, the unconjugated bilirubin is elevated. Very right. The stool urobilinogen is elevated, urine urobilinogen is elevated, urine bilirubin is not elevated. So the correct answer, which of the following will be incorrect in RH incompatibility? Urine bilirubin will not be raised. Okay, going to question number 8. This is a somewhat straightforward question. A DNA methylation is not related with. We will see one by one where the DNA methylation is required or not. You already know that DNA methylation is required for capping. Here we have the 7-methyl guanosine added at 5' so you can see here the methylation is involved in capping. Methylation is involved in capping. Talking about gene silencing, we know that methylation of the residues on DNA, methylation of DNA causes gene silencing. Methylation of DNA causes the gene silencing. The transcription will be diminished if there is methylation. Let's take a look at the mismatch repair. Very quickly I'll show you the mismatch repair and then the story will become clear. After replication, sometimes there can be mismatch. A and T have to pair, G and C have to pair, but this pairing may not be occurring correctly. So you can see there is a mismatch here. Let's say in front of G and the C should have been there, but A has been added. So this is a mismatch. Now the problem in place in front of the repair machinery is which is the parent and which is the new strand, because the correction must be made on the new strand. That is where the methylation comes into picture. The old DNA is methylated. There is enzyme called methyltransferase. So old DNA is methylated, which is used to identify the new versus the old strand, and so that the correction occurs only in the old strand. Alright, so methylation has a definite role in the mismatch repair, a very definite role in the mismatch repair. So with the help of this, what we do, we separate the defective part in the alternate strand. See, this is the parent strand. So methylation helps us to identify the parent strand so that we carry out the cleavage only in the new strand. We carry out the cleavage only in the new strand and then fill in the gap in the new strand. So please note, methylation is very important for mismatch repair. Methylation is very important for mismatch repair. Going back to the question, so mismatch repair also requires methylation. So we're left with the DNA replication. Among the given options, the best answer should be DNA replication. It doesn't require the DNA methylation so strictly for the replication purpose. Okay, next question. Hayflick's limit. Now this is something which I've been teaching for maybe last 4-5 years, because it is a very important potential question. It describes why the aging occurs. So the Hayflick's limit is very important. You should remember, Hayflick's limit is based on the shortening. It is based on the shortening of the telomere. All right, in those cells where the enzyme telomerase is not there, the telomere will keep getting shortened every time the replication occurs. Although telomere is quite long, the repeating sequences are there. Once a very small amount of telomere is left behind, the telomere is not able to perform its function. What is the function of telomere? Like I say in my class, telomere protects from the DNA repair machinery, which in this case finally leads to apoptosis. So basically what the telomere is doing, it is protecting from apoptosis. As long as the telomere is there, the apoptosis will not occur and the cell can keep dividing. So telomere, you can think of it as a counter. It will count how many times the cell has divided, and it has a preset value. For humans, this preset value is in the range of the 80 divisions, or rather you can say 70 divisions. There is obviously deviation of plus minus 5% is already existing, but this is true for those cells where the Telomerase is not active, where the telomerase is not active. If we have the stem cells, whether it is the hematopoietic stem cell, the hair follicle, the male germ cells, the epithelium of skin and GIT, in these places the stem cells are there. So there the telomerase is there and unlimited division occur. Once the telomerase is not there, only a certain number of divisions can occur in the body. This is the Hayflick's limit. Hayflick's limit describes the total number of time a cell can divide in its lifetime in vivo. Alright, total number of times a cell can divide in its lifetime in vivo. Okay, so that's about the Hayflick limit. A lot of research going on in how to bypass the Hayflick limit to prevent the aging, or how to induce it in cancer cells where the Hayflick limit is suddenly lost. So these are some of the points to consider. Now this was a straightforward question. Question number 10, calories from total parenteral nutrition, where you have the 100 milligram of dextrose, that's glucose, the 30 milligram of amino acid and 40 milligram of lipids. To answer this question, you only need to know these values. How much energy are you going to get from a certain milligram of the nutrient? If it is gram, then it becomes the kilocalorie. Please note, if it is gram, then it becomes the kilocalorie. The question says calories, it doesn't say the kilocalorie. So you write these values, and in front of it you write the mass. Carbohydrate, how much? 100 milligram. The amino acid, how much? 30 milligram. And lipid, how much? 40 milligram. So this will become 400, this will become 120, and this will become 360. When you add the 3, this is 880, and the correct answer should be option D. So if you know these conversions, carbohydrate how much energy it will give, the amino acid how much energy it will give, and the lipid how much energy it will give, then the question becomes very, very simple. Alright, so this is how you're going to calculate the energy from the total parenteral nutrition if the mass of the carbohydrate, lipid and the protein is provided in the question. Question number 11. Now this is again a not expected question, because these are very rare cases. Neonatal seizure due to vitamin deficiency is a very rare instance. Now various options you can see were given: the thiamine, pyridoxine, riboflavin and pantothenic acid. Here two potential answers are pyridoxine and thiamine, but we'll see what are the best possible answers, or in the future if the different options are there in the exam, how to decide. Please note the best possible answer will always be pyridoxine, because we have well defined pyridoxine dependent epilepsy or seizure. This is a very well defined entity, pyridoxine dependent seizure or pyridoxine dependent epilepsy, known as the PDS or the PD. It is a recognized cause of intractable seizure in the neonate. So if it is there in the option, always the pyridoxine will be the preferred answer. In addition, some others can cause the seizures. For example, we have a new entity called folinic acid responsive epilepsy, where we have to supplement by vitamin B9, that is the folic acid, and the intractable epileptic seizures are resolved. Similarly, in some individuals, there is the deficiency of the biotinidase. Biotinidase will cleave the biocytidine and release the biotin. Alright, it will release the biotin. This biotin then becomes available for the enzymes which carry out carboxylation, the carboxylases. There are 5 well-defined carboxylases which require the biotin. If the biotinidase is not working, these carboxylases will not be able to work, so we get the multiple carboxylase deficiency, and it also presents with seizures. In addition, seizures with vitamin B12 deficiency are rare but reported. If pyridoxine is not there, if B12, if B9 is not there in the option, if B7 is not there in the option, then the next best answer becomes the vitamin B12. Alright. What about thiamine? About thiamine, you have to remember it is required deficiency will cause the condition maple syrup urine disease? Here we have mental retardation but no seizures. Seizures are not seen, although mental retardation may be seen. So if none of them is given, only then the thymine can be the possible answer. Otherwise, the best answer is pyridoxine, followed by the folinic acid, that is B9, followed by the B7, that is biotin, followed by the B12. These will be the possible answers in order of preference. All right, best, and then we have these options which can cause seizures in the neonate. Very simple question. The vitamin D synthesis, what is the sequence, which organs are involved in the vitamin D synthesis? All right, so let's see how the vitamin D is synthesized in the body, and quickly we'll get to know what is the sequence. So first and foremost, the cholesterol in the skin, when exposed to the UV light, when it is exposed to the UV light, it gets converted to the pre-vitamin D, and this pre-vitamin D by thermal isomerization gets converted to the cholecalciferol vitamin D3. This vitamin D3 can also come from diet. It can also come from diet or a similar compound that is D2. D2 is of plant origin. D2 is of plant origin. So D2 or D3 can come from the diet. D3 which is obtained from cholesterol, and D2 which is obtained from ergosterol. It is a cholesterol like compound obtained in the seen in the plants. So either D2 or D3 can come from the diet also, or the cholesterol can get converted to the vitamin D3, that is the pre-cholesterol, in the skin. So first is the skin. The first organ where the cholesterol is modified to form the vitamin D is skin. This cholecalciferol is then acted upon by the 25 hydroxylase. Please note, it is acted upon by the 25 hydroxylase, where in the liver. So first skin is followed by liver. First skin, and that is followed by liver, where we have the 25 hydroxylase. All right, so intermediate is formed which is called 25 hydroxy cholecalciferol. This is the type of vitamin D we measure in the blood. Why? Because it has a long half-life. All right, this 25 hydroxy cholecalciferol is then acted upon by the 1 hydroxylase, where in the kidney. So skin, liver, kidney, this is the order. So 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol is the active form of vitamin D. All right, its inactivation also occurs in the kidney by the action of the 24 hydroxylase. All right, if it acts on the 25 hydroxycholecalciferol, then you get the 24-25 dihydroxycholecalciferol inactive. Or if it acts on the active form of vitamin D, then it forms the calcitetrol, which is also inactive. Both are the inactive forms. Once the hydroxylation at position 24 occurs, vitamin D becomes inactive. All right, so final activation also occurs in the kidney, and inactivation also occurs in the kidney. Remember, the correct order for synthesis of vitamin D is skin, liver, and then the kidney. Going back to the question, the skin, liver, and kidney would be the correct sequence for vitamin D synthesis. Moving on to question number 13. Dicumarol. Dicumarol is an inhibitor of vitamin K. All of you know this. Warfarin and dicumarol, both of them act on the vitamin K epoxide reductase, and both of them act via the competitive inhibition. Please note, the dicumarol and warfarin, both of them act via the competitive inhibition. Competitive inhibition means when you give the excess of vitamin K, it is able to displace the dicumarol as well as warfarin. So when there is inhibition of action of vitamin K by dicumarol or warfarin, can be overcome by giving the excess of the vitamin K. All right, So remember, diaconal action can be inhibited by giving excess of vitamin K. Now we had this question of Accutane. Nowadays, a lot of questions are coming on the Vacutainer. You should know which type of Vacutainer is used for which collection of which sample. And one very important thing we have to remember is which tube to use first, then second, then third. We call it the order of draw. When you're taking the sample, you should know the order of draw. What is the order of draw? Let's see. First, correct about given Vacutainer. You can see here a red top is there. A red top is there either in the plain vial or it has the clot activator, depending on whether it is a plastic tube or a glass tube. So let us quickly take a look at the draw for the specimen and which tubes are used and what sample is collected. First, always for culture studies, to avoid any contamination when you're taking the blood sample for culture studies, first sample should always be culture studies if we are doing a culture. All right. So blood culture bottles, various types can be there, pediatric acid for acid fall bacteria or for testing the antibiotic resistance, etc. Different types of culture bottles are there. So first sample in the culture bottle. Second, the sample which has the blue top, which is for coagulation studies. You know that most of the tubes have certain important additives which can interfere with the coagulation parameters. Therefore, we must first take the sample if we are going to do the coagulation studies, PT, PTTK, so INR. If those values have to be determined, then first you take them in the blue top. The blue top may either contain the sodium citrate or it may contain CTAD, that is citrate theophylline adenosine dipyridamole, which is for some specific platelet function. Alright, so CTAD for specific platelet function, and otherwise we can just take the sodium citrate. Both of them will have the blue top. Both of them will have the blue top. After that, we take the red one. Remember, depending on whether it is the glass, if the glass one is there, it is silicone coated, or if it is plastic one is coated by the clot activator. All right. So when we want to measure the analytes in the serum, we will have to allow the blood to clot so that the serum can separate out, and that is having the red tube. You can see the no gel is there. There are tubes where the gel is also present. The red tube only, the gel may also be there. Number 4 is the gold top with gel. It has clot activator and gel for serum separation. So just like in the 3 we did not have any gel, something similar is there, but the serum separation gel is there. It is also for serum integration biochemistry. So faster separation of serum and clot can occur, so that the contamination of the serum with the clotted particles does not occur. Number 5, we have the light green top. Light green top contains lithium heparin, and you can see at the bottom we have the gel. This is for separation of the plasma. Alright, the plasma will separate from the blood, and this is for plasma determination. This is for plasma determination in biochemistry. Lavender top, all of you have seen very commonly. It is commonly coated with EDTA if it is glass, or spray coated EDTA if it is plastic. It is used for the whole blood hematology. Whole blood hematology, it is one of the most widely used tubes. And number 7 is the pink top. It is also having the EDTA, but the label which is here, it has special cross match parameters. All right, you can list what are the various subgroups where the cross matching has been performed and it has been found to be non-reactive or acceptable. So the pink and the lavender tops are having similar content. Only thing is the labeling which is there in the pink top is slightly different. It is more suitable for the special cross match required in the blood bank. So we collect the sample for blood bank in the tubes having the pink top. If pink top is not available, then you can do the collection in the lavender top also. And last we have the gray top. Again, all of you know this, gray top will have the potassium oxalate or sodium chloride, but nowadays more commonly it has the sodium chloride and the sodium EDTA. It must have the sodium chloride because sodium chloride is going to inhibit the glycolysis. It is used for glucose determination. Okay, so this is the specific order of draw, starting with the culture studies and right up to the glucose. In addition, there are some special tubes about which you might want to know. The first one being the green or the dark green top, it can have sodium heparin or the lithium heparin, which is also for plasma determination biochemistry. Just like the green top was there, similarly the uh, dark green top can also be there. And last we have the royal blue color. Royal blue color, it is having the clot activator, and it is for trace elements when you're doing the toxicology or nutritional biochemistry. So what is special about this blue tube is we have special caps here. Why special caps? These special caps have a very low concentration of trace elements, so that you are able to identify the trace elements from the blood sample, and you're not actually getting the spurious result. If the trace element proof top is not there, when you use the puncturing needle there, it will carry the trace elements if it is there on the surface. So we need special caps where the trace elements are either not there or at very low quantity it is there, so that contamination does not occur. So royal blue caps, here we have special caps which have very low trace elements. Alright, commonly used in the forensic labs. They're commonly used in the forensic labs when you're determining the trace elements or the toxicology, etc. And that is there, they are used. So let's take a quick look at the order of draw. You should know the order of draw. First, the culture, then the blue top when you want to do the coagulation study, then the serum, that is the red top. After that you take the serum with the gel separator, and then we have the green top for the plasma determination. Then you have the lavender and the pink top, the lavender for routine hematological studies and the pink top for the blood bank studies. And then lastly you will take the glucose sample, which is in the gray top vial. Okay, so we already marked the answer previously. The clot activator will be there in the red tube. Next we come to the question on the creatinine clearance. The question on creatinine clearance are there. Which value is not required for creatinine clearance? To answer this question, you should know what we mean by clearance. Clearance means urine concentration into urine volume divided by plasma concentration of whatever analyte you are measuring, whether it is the urea, it is the creatinine, it is the pH, it is inulin, whatever you are measuring. For that, these parameters are required. So we require the urine creatinine. Alright, urine creatinine 24 hours, only that will tell us the concentration. We require the serum creatinine. We require the 24-hour urine for the urinary flow rate. Alright, what we don't require is the volume of serum passing through kidney in 24 hours. So the correct answer, which value is not required to measure the creatinine clearance, is volume of serum passing through kidney in 24 hours. The various clearances besides creatinine which you may come across is urea and inulin. These are some of the important clearances which we may come across: the urea clearance and the inulin clearance. Okay, and next we come to the last question. This is a new question based on the latest edition, that is the 31st edition of the Harper, where the new term exosome has been added. Exosome contain a lot of intracellular particles which are secreted outside the cell. These exosomes can be engulfed by other cells, and thereby they help in intercellular communication. They may contain microRNA, they may contain small nuclear RNA, they may even contain small fragments of the messenger RNA, which can help in transmitting various proteins or regulatory signals to the other surrounding cells. So exosomes are participating in the intercellular communication. Alright, the lysosome will stay inside the cell, peroxisome will stay inside the cell, microsome, that is the endoplasmic reticulum, all of this will stay inside the cell. Intercellular communication can only be carried out by the exosomes. Alright, so basically what happens, the multivesicular endosomes, they will merge with the plasma membrane. When they merge with the plasma membrane, then they release multiple exosomes. Alright, so you can see a few new topics, but mostly old traditional basics are being asked in your AIIMS exam and the other exams. So After 1 week, maybe we are going to be discussing the JIPMER paper, and after that, we'll try to discuss the PGI paper also, which were asked in this session, the June session. If you have any doubts or queries, you can contact me via any of these platforms. On Facebook, we have the Biochemistry by Dr. Nilesh Chandra, the page is there. Similarly, on YouTube, you can see the latest videos on Biochemistry by Dr. Nilesh Chandra. And we have the Telegram group where you can drop in with your questions, queries, or any specific problems that you have. You can also drop me an email at dearnilesh@gmail.com, and you can send me a WhatsApp at this number 7011295945. That is all for today from my side. Take care and stay safe in this COVID crisis, and keep preparing. I'll try to keep posting some recent paper discussions to you, which will help you in your preparations. Any doubts or queries, any questions you want to ask from all this that we have discussed? Any questions from the 16 questions that we have discussed for the biochemistry in AIMS? Any questions that you want to ask? So if there will be no questions, I think we'll close it here. And you can send your questions later on also on the various platforms that I've highlighted. And we'll meet again maybe in 1 week with the next paper discussion that will be for JIPMER. Thank you very much. Take care and bye bye.